The sudden crack of thunder startled Olivia Redfield awake, her arms instinctively tightening around the small bundle nestled against her chest. The baby whimpered softly, disturbed by the violent sound that rattled the weathered planks of the abandoned barn where they had sought refuge as rain pounded mercilessly against the roof. She had been running for 3 days straight, and exhaustion had finally claimed her when she collapsed in this forgotten corner of Wyoming Territory, 1878. Olivia's heart raced as she heard the creak of the barn door. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind a stack of moldy hay, one hand covering her son's mouth to silence his cries. Heavy footfalls echoed through the cavernous space, accompanied by the jingle of spurs and the distinct sound of a rifle being cocked. "I know you're in here," a deep voice called out. "Best come out now, I mean no harm." She remained frozen, her breath shallow. The baby squirmed against her palm, hungry and uncomfortable. "Look," the voice continued, softer now. "This is my property, but I ain't one to turn away folks in need, especially not with a storm like this. You'll both be fed before dawn, that's a promise." Something in his tone, a gentle certainty, perhaps made Olivia pause. The baby's soft cry grew more insistent, as if encouraging her to trust this stranger. "How do I know you won't turn us in?" she finally called out, her voice cracking from disuse and fear. The footsteps stopped. "Turn you in? Madam, I don't know what trouble you're in, and it ain't my business. But letting a woman and child starve in my barn during a thunderstorm now, that would trouble my conscience something fierce." After a long moment, Olivia stood on shaky legs, cradling her 3-month-old son against her chest. She stepped out from her hiding place, blinking in the light of the lantern that illuminated the tall figure of a man. He stood with his rifle pointed toward the ground, his face half shadowed beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. Rain dripped from his duster onto the dirt floor of the barn. "Quinn Jacobson," he said simply, tipping his hat. "This here's my ranch." "Olivia," she replied, hesitating before adding, "Redfield, and this is Henry." Quinn's eyes fell to the baby, his expression softening visibly. "Well, Mrs. Redfield, miss," she corrected quickly, then immediately regretted revealing even that small detail. He nodded, seeming to understand her wariness. "Miss Redfield, that little one sounds hungry and you look dead on your feet. My cabin's just beyond those trees." "Not much, but it's dry, warm, and there's food." Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn and giving Olivia her first clear look at Quinn Jacobson. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His eyes, however, held no malice, only a straightforward concern that made her desperate situation seem slightly less hopeless. "I can't pay you," she admitted, clutching Henry closer. "Wasn't asking for payment." He took a step back, creating distance as if to show he meant no threat. "Storm's getting worse, decision's yours, but it's offered freely." Henry's cry grew louder and Olivia's resolve crumbled. "All right," she whispered, stepping forward. "Just for tonight." Quinn nodded once, then turned to lead the way. He paused at the barn door, looking out at the driving rain. Without a word, he removed his duster and held it out to her. "For the baby," he said. Olivia hesitated before accepting the coat, wrapping it around herself and Henry. The garment was still warm from Quinn's body and smelled of leather, tobacco, and horses not unpleasant. She found herself thinking. They dashed through the downpour toward a small log cabin nestled among a stand of pines. Quinn pushed open the door, ushering her inside before quickly following and securing the latch behind them. The interior was simple but neat, a far cry from the opulent Boston home she'd fled. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its embers casting a warm glow throughout the single room. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in one corner, a narrow bed in another, and a small kitchen area occupied the remaining space. "It ain't much," Quinn said, moving to stoke the fire. "It's perfect," Olivia responded honestly, the sight of shelter nearly bringing her to tears after days of running. As the fire blazed to life, Quinn busied himself at the stove, putting on a pot of coffee and retrieving a small pot of what smelled like stew. "Been keeping this warm. Simple fare, venison and potatoes, but it'll fill your belly." Olivia sank gratefully into one of the wooden chairs, adjusting Henry in her arms. The baby's cries had subsided to unhappy whimpers. "He needs milk," she said softly. I haven't been able to feed him properly for almost 2 days now." Quinn frowned, concern etching deeper lines around his eyes. "Got goat's milk from my nanny goat. Not as good as mother's milk, but it'll do in a pinch. Been using it for an orphaned calf." He poured some milk from a clay jug into a small cup, testing the temperature on his wrist before handing it to her. "Might need to dip your finger in and let him suck on it. Don't have proper bottles here." Olivia was too grateful to feel embarrassed as she followed his suggestion. Henry latched onto her milk-coated finger eagerly, and soon they established a rhythm dip, feed, repeat that slowly satisfied the hungry infant. Quinn placed a bowl of steaming stew before her, along with a hunk of bread. "Eat," he urged. "Can't take care of him if you don't take care of yourself." She couldn't argue with that logic and began to eat with her free hand, the rich flavors almost overwhelming after days of near starvation. Quinn sat across from her with his own bowl, eating quietly, his eyes occasionally drifting to Henry with undisguised curiosity. "How old?" he finally asked. 3 months, she answered, relaxing slightly as warm food filled her stomach. "Born in early March," Quinn nodded, seeming to calculate something in his head. "Long way from anywhere, Miss Redfield. Nearest town's Prosperity Creek, good 15 miles southwest." Olivia stiffened. "Are you asking why I'm here?" "No," he said simply. "Just letting you know where you are. Everyone's got their reasons for being where they are. Yours are your own." They finished their meal in silence, the only sounds coming from the crackling fire and Henry's occasional gurgles. When Olivia could eat no more, she set down her spoon with a sigh. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate for the kindness he'd shown. Quinn stood, clearing their bowls. "You and the little one can take the bed tonight. I'll bunk by the fire." "I can't put you out of your bed," she protested. "You ain't. I'm offering it." His tone brooked no argument. "Clean linen's in the trunk at the foot. There's a wash basin behind the screen if you want to clean up." The prospect of washing away days of dust and fear was too tempting to refuse. Olivia carefully laid Henry on the center of the bed, surrounding him with pillows before accepting the clean shirt Quinn offered for her to sleep in. Behind the modest privacy screen, she washed quickly, the cool water reviving her even as it revealed the extent of her exhaustion in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once vibrant auburn hair hung in limp, tangled strands around her too thin face. She hardly recognized herself. Dressed in Quinn's shirt, which hung nearly to her knees, she emerged to find him setting up a bedroll near the fire, his back tactfully turned toward her. "Quinn," she said quietly, causing him to look over his shoulder. "Thank you, truly." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest, Miss Redfield. Morning comes early out here." Olivia climbed into the bed beside Henry, who had fallen into a milk-satisfied slumber. The mattress was stuffed with straw and far from the feather beds she'd known in Boston, but at that moment, it felt like the most luxurious accommodation imaginable. As sleep claimed her, her last conscious thought was that for the first time in months, she felt something close to safe. Dawn broke with gentle persistence, filtering through the cabin's small windows and rousing Olivia from the deepest sleep she'd experienced since Henry's birth. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back the storm, the barn, the taciturn cowboy who'd offered shelter. Henry stirred beside her, his tiny face scrunching as he prepared to announce his hunger. Olivia quickly sat up, looking around the cabin for Quinn, but he was nowhere to be seen. His bedroll had been neatly packed away and fresh coffee bubbled on the stove. On the table sat a small pitcher of goat's milk, still warm to the touch. She fed Henry using the method from the previous night, marveling at how much more settled her son seemed after just one night of proper shelter and food. His cheeks, which had begun to hollow during their flight, already looked fuller. After changing him using the clean rags she found thoughtfully laid out beside the milk, Olivia dressed in her own clothes, grimacing at their soiled state. She was just wondering whether she should wait for Quinn's return or make her way back to the road when the door opened, and he stepped inside, arms laden with firewood. "Morning," he said, nodding toward the stove. "Coffee's hot if you want some." "Thank you for everything." She gestured around, encompassing the shelter, the food, the kindness he'd shown them. Quinn stacked the wood neatly beside the fireplace. "Figured you'd be hungry, got some eggs from the henhouse, not much, but it'll start the day right." As he moved to the stove and began cracking eggs into a cast iron pan, Olivia studied him in the clear morning light. He was tall and lean, with the muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. His hands, though calloused, moved with a surprising gentleness as he prepared their breakfast. His face, now that she could see it properly, was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw covered in stubble and eyes the color of a summer sky. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, trying to distract herself from her scrutiny. 5 years on my own," he answered, not looking up from his cooking. "Worked as a ranch hand before that, saved every penny. This land ain't much compared to some spreads, but it's mine. Got about 50 head of cattle, the vegetable patch out back, chickens, 2 goats, and my horse Thunder." He spoke with quiet pride that resonated with Olivia. To own something, to build something with one's own hands, it was a freedom she had only recently begun to understand the value of. "It's a fine place," she said sincerely. Quinn glanced at her, a hint of surprise crossing his features, as if he'd expected judgment rather than appreciation. He served up the eggs along with slices of bread toasted in the pan's residual heat. "What about you?" he asked, sitting across from her. "Where you headed?" Olivia tensed, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. "West," she answered vaguely. "Just west." Quinn's eyes, perceptive despite his outward simplicity, studied her face. "Running from something or to something? Both, perhaps." She met his gaze steadily. "I don't mean to be rude, Mr. Jacobson, but my circumstances are complicated," he finished for her. "Most folks out here got complicated circumstances. That's why they're out here." They ate in silence for a moment before Olivia gathered her courage. "I should move on today. I've imposed enough, and we both know I can't stay in your barn indefinitely." "Why not?" Quinn asked, so matter-of-factly that Olivia nearly choked on her coffee. "Excuse me," he set down his fork, expression serious. "Got an old line shack about a 1/4 mile from here. Used to be where the previous owner's foreman lived. Been using it for storage mostly, but it's sound. Roof don't leak, got a small stove, could be made comfortable for a woman and child." Olivia stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. "Are you offering us a place to stay?" "For a time," he clarified, "till you figure your way. Winter's coming in a few months, not a good time to be traveling with a little one." "But you don't know me," she protested. "I could be anyone running from anything." Quinn's eyes flicked to Henry, who was contentedly sleeping in a nest of blankets Olivia had fashioned on the bed. "Don't reckon a woman on the run with a baby is likely to be running from something she done wrong, more likely running from something done to her." His insight was so close to the truth that Olivia felt momentarily exposed, as if he could see through the careful walls she'd built around her story. "I can't accept charity," she said finally. "Ain't charity I'm offering. Place needs a woman's touch. Could use help with the chickens, the garden. Maybe some cooking when I'm out working cattle," he shrugged. "Been eating my own cooking for 5 years. Wouldn't mind a change." Olivia considered his offer, turning it over in her mind. She had exactly $3.42 to her name, hidden in a pouch sewn into her skirt. Her original plan had been to reach California, where she had a distant cousin, but the journey had proven far more difficult and expensive than she'd anticipated. The prospect of a roof over their heads, even temporarily, was tempting beyond measure. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," she said softly. Quinn's expression remained steady. "Trouble finds its own way out here. Question is whether you're running from the kind that'll follow." The bluntness of his question demanded equal honesty. "I don't think so. Not all the way out here. He wouldn't expect me to come west." She caught her mistake, immediately revealing that she was running from he, but Quinn simply nodded, accepting the information without pressing for more. "Offer stands," he said, rising to clear their plates. Line shack ain't much, but it's private. You can think on it while I show you around the place. Olivia found herself nodding. I'd like to see it at least. After breakfast, with Henry securely wrapped against her chest using a length of cloth Quinn had provided, they walked the boundaries of his modest ranch. The morning air was crisp and clear, the storm having washed the world clean. The land itself was beautiful in its rugged way, rolling hills dotted with pine trees, a clear stream cutting through the property, and in the distance, the majestic peaks of mountains still capped with snow. Quinn showed her the small barn where he kept his horse and the milk goats, the chicken coop where a dozen hens pecked contentedly, and the vegetable garden that, while somewhat neglected, produced enough to supplement his diet. "Ain't had time to tend it proper," he admitted as they walked between rows of green beans, tomatoes, and corn. "Been focused on the cattle." "It's a good start," Olivia said, already mentally reorganizing the space. In Boston, gardening had been her small act of rebellion against the strictures of society life, a place where dirt under her fingernails was a badge of honor rather than a social disgrace. Finally, they reached the lined shack. From the outside, it was indeed humble, a single-room structure built of logs with a small porch and a stone chimney. Quinn pushed open the door, revealing a space currently cluttered with tools, bags of feed, and various supplies. "Needs clearing out," he said, unnecessarily, "but the stove works. Could bring in a bed from town, table, chairs." Olivia stepped inside, her practiced eye evaluating the space. Despite the clutter, she could see the potential with a thorough cleaning, some simple curtains, perhaps a rug. "I could make this work," she found herself saying. "For a while, at least," Quinn nodded as if he'd expected no other answer. "We can start clearing it today, be ready in a day or two." As they walked back toward the main cabin, Henry awake now and observing the world with wide eyes, Olivia felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief at the prospect of shelter, wariness at accepting help from a stranger, and underlying it all, a cautious hope that perhaps here, in this remote corner of Wyoming, she and Henry might finally be safe. "Mr. Jacobson," she began. "Quinn," he corrected. "Only Mr. Jacobson to strangers and tax collectors." A smile tugged at her lips. "Quinn, then. I want you to know that I'm grateful, but also that I intend to earn my keep. I'm no stranger to hard work." He glanced at her hands, which despite weeks of travel still bore traces of their genteel upbringing. "Never doubted it," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Olivia followed his gaze to her hands and laughed softly. "These will callous quickly enough, they have before." Quinn raised an eyebrow but didn't question her statement. Instead, he pointed toward a rise in the distance where a cluster of cattle grazed. "Need to check on the herd. You and the little one rest up. Tools for clearing the shack are in the barn if you're of a mind to start." She recognized the gesture for what it was, giving her space to decide her next move without pressure. "I think I'll do just that." As Quinn saddled his horse and rode out toward the distant herd, Olivia stood in the doorway of his cabin, Henry contentedly exploring her hair with his tiny fingers, and felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: the freedom to choose her own path. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity as Olivia and Quinn transformed the lined shack from a storage space into a habitable dwelling. Quinn cleared out the heavy equipment and supplies while Olivia scrubbed every surface until her hands were raw. Henry observed their efforts from a makeshift cradle Quinn had fashioned from a wooden crate, lined with blankets and positioned in whatever patch of shade was available. On the second day, Quinn rode into Prosperity Creek, returning with a small iron bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair that he claimed to have found in the back of Jensen's store, gathering dust. Olivia suspected he had paid more than he let on, but she accepted the gifts with gratitude, knowing they represented far more than mere furniture. They were the foundations of a home, however temporary. By the 3rd evening, the shack was ready. Quinn had repaired the roof where it had sagged, ensured the stove was in working order, and even constructed a small cradle for Henry from pine boards, sanded smooth to prevent splinters. Olivia had hung simple curtains made from flour sacks, arranged wildflowers in a mason jar on the table, and created a homey atmosphere that belied the humble nature of the structure. "It's perfect," she said, standing in the center of the single room that would now be their home. "I hardly recognize it as the same place." Quinn leaned against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. "Reckon it ain't seen this much care since it was built." Olivia turned to face him, struck once again by how this taciturn cowboy had changed her fortunes with a simple act of kindness. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "No need," he said, shifting uncomfortably under her grateful gaze, "just doing what needed doing." That evening, as a token of thanks, Olivia insisted on cooking dinner in the main cabin. Using the modest supplies available, she prepared a meal that, while simple, showcased her considerable culinary skills she'd acquired not in Boston's formal dining rooms but in its kitchen, where she'd often escaped to learn from the cook. Quinn ate with obvious appreciation, clearing his plate twice before sitting back with a satisfied sigh. "Best meal I've had since I left my mother's table," he declared. "High praise." Olivia smiled, pleased by his reaction, "though I could do more with a better stocked pantry." "Your garden has potential, but it needs attention." "Been meaning to tend it better," Quinn admitted. "Just never seems to be enough hours in the day." "Well, now you have an extra pair of hands." Olivia bounced Henry gently on her knee, "or will have once this young man is a bit more independent." Quinn's eyes lingered on Henry, who was chewing enthusiastically on his own fist. "He's a good baby, doesn't fuss much." "He's been through a lot in his short life," Olivia said quietly. "Sometimes I think he knows he needs to be strong for my sake." The words had slipped out before she could censor them, revealing more than she'd intended. Quinn's eyes met hers, questions evident in their blue depths, but he merely nodded. "Children are more knowing than folks give them credit for," he said. After dinner, as Olivia prepared to take Henry to their new quarters for the night, Quinn cleared his throat awkwardly. "Been thinking," he began, "about your situation. Don't know what you're running from and don't need to, but folks in town are curious by nature. If you're planning to stay a while, might be easier if there was a reason folks could understand why you're here." Olivia froze, suddenly wary. "What kind of reason?" "Could say you're my widowed sister," Quinn suggested. "Come to help out after losing your husband. Would explain the baby, why you're living separate but on my land." The thoughtfulness of his suggestion, a ready-made explanation that would shield her from unnecessary questions, touched Olivia deeply. Yet there was something about the term sister that sat uncomfortably with her. "That's very considerate," she said carefully, "though I'm not sure I look much like your sister." Quinn's eyes traveled briefly over her auburn hair and delicate features, so different from his own sandy coloring and angular face. "Suppose not," he admitted. "Could say you're a cousin instead. Point is, folks need a story they can understand or they make up their own. And those can be more dangerous than the truth," Olivia finished for him, well aware of how gossip could destroy. "Cousin it is, then. Thank you for thinking of it." As she gathered Henry and their few belongings to move to the lined shack, Quinn accompanied them, carrying a lantern to light their way through the gathering dusk. At the door, he hesitated. "Got my rifle in the cabin, but you should have something here too." He reached into his boot and withdrew a small revolver. "It's loaded. Know how to use it?" Olivia stared at the weapon, a chill running through her despite the warm evening. "No," she admitted, "simple enough. Point and pull the trigger. Try not to need it, but if you do." He placed it on the table. Better to have it and not need it. The gesture, practical yet protective, reinforced her growing sense that Quinn Jacobson was a rare kind of man, one who offered help without expectation, who respected boundaries while providing security. "Good night, Quinn," she said softly, "and thank you again." He tipped his hat, his expression hidden in the shadows cast by the lantern. "Good night, Olivia. Sleep well." As she settled Henry into his new cradle and prepared for her first night in their little home, Olivia found herself wondering about the solitary cowboy who had so unexpectedly become their protector. What had brought him to this remote ranch? Why did a man who clearly valued his independence go out of his way to help a stranger? And why did the thought of being introduced as his sister bother her more than it should? Sleep claimed her before she could puzzle out answers to these questions, but they lingered in her mind, laying the foundation for a curiosity that would only grow stronger in the days to come. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm as natural as the rising and setting of the sun. Olivia found her place in the daily operations of the ranch, starting with the revival of the neglected garden. With Henry strapped to her back or napping in the shade, she weeded, watered, and nurtured the vegetables back to vibrant health, expanding the plot to include herbs and additional root vegetables that would store well through the coming winter. Quinn watched her transformation from city woman to capable rancher's helper with quiet admiration. Her hands, as she had predicted, quickly developed the calluses of honest labor. Her fair skin bronzed under the summer sun, and the hollowness in her cheeks filled out as regular meals restored her health. For his part, Quinn taught her the basics of caring for the chickens and goats, showing her how to milk the nanny goat with patient hands that guided hers until she mastered the technique. He demonstrated how to collect eggs without agitating the hens, how to mend fences with wire and pliers, and the countless other skills necessary for survival in this remote corner of Wyoming. They developed an easy partnership during the daylight hours, working separately but toward the common goal of preparing the ranch for winter. In the evenings, they often shared meals, with Olivia cooking in Quinn's cabin before returning to the line shack with Henry. Yet for all their growing comfort with each other, certain boundaries remained firmly in place. Quinn never asked about her past, and Olivia offered only the vaguest details. She learned that he had come west from Missouri after the war, worked as a cowhand on several ranches, and eventually saved enough to purchase this land when the previous owner died without heirs. He mentioned a brother back east, parents long deceased, but otherwise seemed as determined as she was to focus on the present rather than dwell on what had come before. The unspoken agreement to live in the moment suited Olivia perfectly. For the first time since Henry's birth, she found herself thinking beyond mere survival to actual living. She planted flowers alongside the vegetables, hung curtains in the windows of the line shack, and sang to Henry as she worked small joys that had been unimaginable just months before. It was during one such moment, as she sang a lullaby while hanging laundry on a line strung between two pines, that she realized Quinn had reined his horse to a stop nearby and was listening, an unreadable expression on his sun-bronzed face. "Don't stop on my account," he said when she fell silent, embarrassed at being caught in such an unguarded moment. "It's just an old song my grandmother taught me," she explained, pinning one of Henry's tiny shirts to the line. "Nothing special." "Sounded special to me," Quinn said, dismounting. "Haven't heard much singing since coming out here. It's nice." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have, and Olivia busied herself with the laundry to hide the flush that rose to her cheeks. "How was the herd today?" "Good, fat and happy. Should fetch a fair price when I drive them to market next month." He removed his hat, running a hand through hair damp with sweat. "Thinking of riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Anything you need?" Olivia hesitated. She had been at the ranch for nearly 3 weeks now, but had yet to venture into Prosperity Creek. The thought of town of strangers, questions, potential recognition sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach. "Perhaps some fabric," she said finally, "if it's not too much trouble." "Henry's growing so quickly and he'll need warmer clothes for winter." Quinn nodded. "Could use some company on the ride if you're of a mind to come along. Town's small but decent. Might do you good to see something besides this ranch." The invitation, casually offered, represented a significant step. Going to town meant being seen, becoming real in the eyes of others rather than remaining a ghost hiding in the wilderness. It meant testing their story of cousinship, facing questions, however well-meaning. "I don't know," she said hesitantly. "Henry would likely enjoy the change of scenery as much as his mother," Quinn finished for her, "but it's your choice, no pressure either way." Olivia recognized the opportunity for what it was not just a trip to town, but a chance to reclaim some normalcy, to exist in the world again rather than hiding from it. And with Quinn beside her, vouching for her presence, perhaps it would be safe. All right, she decided, surprising herself. We'll come. Quinn's face broke into a rare, full smile that transformed his features and sent an unexpected warmth spreading through Olivia's chest. We'll take the wagon, be more comfortable for you and the little one. That evening, as Olivia prepared for the journey by washing her best dress, the one she'd kept carefully folded at the bottom of her small sack of belongings, she found herself humming the same lullaby Quinn had caught her singing. For the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow with anticipation rather than dread. The road to Prosperity Creek wound through rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines, offering spectacular vistas of the distant mountains. Quinn drove the wagon with Henry nestled between them on the seat, wrapped securely in a blanket despite the summer warmth. The infant watched the passing scenery with wide-eyed fascination, occasionally breaking into toothless grins that melted Olivia's heart. He's taking it all in, Quinn observed, glancing down at the baby. Got a curious nature that'll serve him well. Sometimes too curious, Olivia laughed. He's already trying to grab everything in reach. I fear the day he learns to crawl. Quinn chuckled, the sound rich and warm in the clear mountain air. I'll have to build some gates for the cabin doorways, keep him contained once he's mobile. The casual way he spoke of a future that included Henry's developmental milestones caught Olivia off guard. It implied permanence and assumption that they would still be at the ranch months from now when Henry began to crawl. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. She had never intended to stay beyond the winter, had she? Before she could dwell on this unexpected realization, Prosperity Creek came into view in the valley below. It was indeed small, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the dusty thoroughfare, and scattered houses branching out from the town center. Not much to look at, Quinn admitted, but it's got what we need. General store, smithy, small hotel with a decent restaurant, doctor who doubles as a dentist when needed. Olivia nodded, her anxiety returning as they approached civilization. She adjusted her bonnet, grateful for its wide brim that partially shadowed her face, and smoothed her dress with her free hand. Remember, Quinn said quietly as they rolled into town, you're my cousin from back east, widowed less than a year ago, came west for a fresh start. Simple story, easy to remember, hard to disprove. What was my husband's name? She asked suddenly, realizing they hadn't worked out such details. Thomas, Quinn supplied without hesitation. Thomas Redfield died of pneumonia last winter. Olivia nodded, committing the fabricated history to memory. A lie, yes, but one that would protect both her and Henry, and by extension, Quinn himself from unwanted scrutiny. They drew curious glances as Quinn guided the wagon down the main street toward Jensen's general store. It was clear that new faces were a rarity in Prosperity Creek, and a young woman with a baby even more so. Olivia kept her eyes downcast, acutely aware of the stairs. At the hitching post outside the store, Quinn hopped down first, then reached up to help Olivia descend. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, lifting her effortlessly to the ground. The brief contact sent an unexpected shiver up her spine, one that had nothing to do with fear or the cool mountain air. Inside the store, the proprietor, a balding man with spectacles and a generous waistline, greeted Quinn with familiar warmth. Jacobson, been wondering when you'd show your face in town again. Been what, 2 months? Something like that, Jensen, Quinn replied, removing his hat. Been busy at the ranch. This here's my cousin, Olivia Redfield, and her son Henry. They're staying with me for a spell. Jensen's eyebrows rose slightly as he took in Olivia and the baby, but his smile remained genuine. Well now, that's a sight I never thought I'd see. Quinn Jacobson with family at his side. Welcome to Prosperity Creek, Mrs. Redfield. Any kin of Quinn's is welcome here. Thank you, Olivia murmured, adjusting Henry in her arms. It's a pleasure to meet you. Tragic about your husband, Jensen continued, his expression shifting to practiced solemnity. Quinn mentioned it in his letter last month. Pneumonia takes many good men too soon. Olivia blinked, momentarily confused until she realized that Quinn must have written ahead, establishing their story before they ever set foot in town. His foresight both impressed and touched her. Yes, she managed, lowering her eyes in a show of lingering grief. It was unexpected. Jensen nodded sympathetically before brightening. Well, you've come to the right place for a fresh start. Good, clean air out here, and Quinn's ranch, while modest, is a fine piece of land. As Quinn began listing the supplies they needed, Jensen's wife emerged from the back of the store. Martha Jensen was a plump, maternal woman whose face lit up at the sight of Henry. Within minutes, Olivia found herself seated in a chair by the counter, discussing fabric options for baby clothes while Mrs. Jensen cooed over Henry, who basked in the attention. "You must come to the social on Saturday," Mrs. Jensen insisted as she measured out yards of flannel. "First Saturday of each month, the town gathers at the church hall for food and fellowship. Would do you good to meet everyone at once rather than piecemeal." Olivia hesitated, looking to Quinn, who was examining a new type of fence wire with Jensen. "I'm not sure of course she'll come," Quinn interrupted, surprising Olivia. "About time I showed my face at one of those socials anyway. Folks probably think I've gone wild living out there alone." Mrs. Jensen beamed. "Wonderful, we'll expect you both, all three of you," she corrected, tickling Henry's chin. "Around 6 o'clock, everyone brings something to share." By the time they had completed their shopping, loaded the supplies into the wagon, and enjoyed a simple meal at the hotel restaurant, Olivia had been introduced to what seemed like half the town's population. Each introduction followed the same pattern expressions of sympathy for her loss, welcome to the community, and thinly veiled curiosity about her relationship with the famously solitary Quinn Jacobson. As they drove back toward the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, Olivia found herself surprisingly exhausted by the social interactions that had once been second nature to her in Boston society. "You did well," Quinn said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Folks took to you natural-like. They're kind people," Olivia acknowledged. "I wasn't expecting such a warm welcome. Small towns can be that way. Everybody knows everybody's business, but they also look out for each other." Quinn adjusted the reins, his profile strong against the backdrop of the setting sun. "Been thinking about what Jensen said about the social on Saturday?" "Yes," Olivia prompted when he didn't continue. "Don't have to go if you don't want to," he said. "Just thought it might be good to establish you proper like in town, make folks less curious if they feel they know you." Olivia considered this. The logic was sound better to control the narrative by appearing openly than to hide and fuel speculation. And despite her initial nervousness, she had enjoyed the simple pleasure of conversation with Martha Jensen and the other women she'd met. "I think we should go," she decided. "It would be good for Henry to be around other people, and She hesitated, then admitted, "I've missed that." "Being part of a community," Quinn nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Reckon I have too, though I might not have admitted it before you came along." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to examine too closely. Instead, they continued toward home, the words settling comfortably in Olivia's mind, despite all her intentions to consider the ranch a temporary haven rather than a permanent destination. The Saturday social at Prosperity Creek's church hall proved to be exactly the kind of wholesome gathering Olivia had both anticipated and feared. The large room was decorated with paper streamers and wildflowers, tables groaned under the weight of home-cooked dishes, and practically the entire population of the small town had turned out for the occasion. Olivia had spent the morning baking an apple pie using fruit from the wild trees that grew near the stream on Quinn's property. It wasn't as elegant as the pastries she'd learned to make in Boston, but the simple, rustic dessert seemed fitting for her new identity. Quinn had surprised her by shaving his usual stubble and donning a clean shirt that she suspected had been purchased specifically for the occasion, though he would never admit to such vanity. He had even polished his boots to a respectable shine, though they still bore the unmistakable marks of a working cowboy's life. They arrived fashionably late, by unspoken agreement late enough that their entrance wouldn't create a spectacle, but not so late as to appear rude. Still, heads turned when they walked in, Quinn carrying the pie while Olivia held Henry, who was dressed in a new outfit she had hastily sewn from the fabric purchased at Jensen's. "There they are." Martha Jensen's voice rang out over the general hum of conversation. She bustled over, her ample form draped in a festive calico dress. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your minds. Come, everyone is dying to meet Quinn's mysterious cousin." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions that left Olivia's head spinning. The town doctor, who insisted she bring Henry in for a proper checkup. The schoolteacher, a spinster named Miss Holloway, who discussed the importance of education with such passion that Olivia found herself nodding along despite Henry being years away from schooling. The blacksmith and his wife, the banker and his family, the sheriff, a grizzled man named Porter who eyed her with the practiced assessment of one accustomed to spotting trouble, but who ultimately offered a gruff welcome. Through it all, Quinn remained at her side, a steady presence that anchored her in the sea of new faces. He seemed different here, among his neighbors still quiet, but with a dry wit that emerged in his sparse comments, earning chuckles from those who knew him well enough to recognize his humor. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Porter commented as they filled their plates at the buffet table. "Quinn Jacobson at a social, with family no less. You must be some kind of miracle worker, Mrs. Redfield." Olivia smiled, careful to maintain her role. "I think it's more that Quinn took pity on a widow and her son. We're grateful for his generosity." "Ain't generosity when it's family," Quinn interjected smoothly. "Just doing right by my own." The sheriff nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by their story. Before he could ask any potentially uncomfortable questions, however, Martha Jensen called for attention, announcing the start of the dancing. Several men had brought fiddles and a banjo, and they struck up a lively tune that soon had couples forming sets for a reel. Olivia watched with a mixture of enjoyment and melancholy, remembering the formal balls of her youth, where dancing had been rigidly structured and closely chaperoned, so different from this exuberant, joyful expression. "You dance, Mrs. Redfield." The question came from a young man who introduced himself as Peter Collins, son of the town's only lawyer. Before she could formulate a polite refusal, Quinn stepped forward. "If my cousin's dancing with anyone tonight, it'll be me. Been too long since I had a proper partner." His possessive tone startled Olivia, but she quickly recovered, passing Henry to a delighted Martha Jensen, who had offered to hold the baby while they danced. "I'd be happy to, though I warn you, it's been some time." Quinn led her to the floor as the musicians began a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, the other taking hers with surprising gentleness for a man whose strength she had witnessed daily in his work around the ranch. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured as they began to move with the music. "I could have simply declined." "Young Collins has a reputation," Quinn replied, his voice low. "Good family, but he fancies himself a charmer of women. Didn't want him bothering you all evening." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "I'm quite capable of handling unwanted attention, you know. Never doubted it." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe I just wanted the dance for myself." The admission, casually stated but weighted with possibility, caused Olivia's breath to catch. She was suddenly acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the blue of his eyes as they held hers. Quinn guided her through the waltz with unexpected grace, his movements fluid despite his usual stoic demeanor. Olivia followed his lead effortlessly, the steps coming back to her as if she'd never stopped dancing in Boston's grand ballrooms. "You dance well," she observed, genuinely surprised. Mother insisted all her boys learn, said it was a skill no man should be without. A shadow crossed his face briefly, never had much cause to use it out here though. "Well, I'm glad you remembered," Olivia said softly. "It's nice to dance again." For a moment they moved in perfect harmony, the music enveloping them in a bubble that seemed to exclude the rest of the room. Olivia found herself relaxing into his embrace, allowing herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of the dance and the sturdy reliability of the man leading her through it. The spell was broken when the music ended, and reality reasserted itself. Olivia stepped back, suddenly conscious of the eyes upon them, the speculation that their closeness might generate in a town hungry for gossip. "Thank you for the dance," she said formally, mindful of their audience. "You're very gallant." Quinn's expression shifted, something like disappointment flickering in his eyes before his usual stoic mask returned. "Just remembering my manners is all." They rejoined Martha Jensen, who surrendered Henry with obvious reluctance. "Such a precious boy," she sighed. "Reminds me of my youngest when he was a babe. They grow so fast, Mrs. Redfield. Cherish these moments." Olivia smiled, settling Henry against her shoulder. "I try to, though it's not always easy when there's work to be done." "That's why family is so important," Martha said, her gaze shifting meaningfully between Olivia and Quinn. "Having someone to share the burden." The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with Olivia's pie receiving enthusiastic compliments and Quinn gradually relaxing into conversation with his neighbors, many of whom expressed surprise at seeing him so sociable. By the time they departed, Henry sleeping soundly in Olivia's arms, she felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, the familiar aftereffects of a successful social engagement, but tempered with a new appreciation for the simple, unpretentious warmth of this community. The ride home in the wagon was quiet, stars blazing overhead in the clear mountain sky. Henry slept bundled against the night chill, and Olivia found herself fighting the urge to lean against Quinn's solid shoulder as fatigue washed over her. "Thank you," she said softly as the lights of the ranch came into view. "For taking us tonight. It was more enjoyable than I expected." Quinn kept his eyes on the road. "Folks liked you. Martha Jensen's already planning to take you under her wing, I could tell. Is that a problem?" Olivia asked, sensing something beneath his casual observation. He shook his head. "No, good to have friends in town, just—" He hesitated, then continued with careful neutrality. "Gets complicated the more people care about you, more questions, more expectations." Olivia understood immediately. Their arrangement, their story, it all functioned best when kept at a distance from prying eyes and concerned hearts. Martha Jensen's maternal interest, while genuine and kind, represented a potential complication neither of them had anticipated. "I'll be careful," she promised. "I won't let anyone get too close." Quinn's hands tightened on the reins. "Didn't mean it like that, just want you to be prepared. Small towns, people get invested quick, especially in a young widow and her baby." The implication hung unspoken between them. Their deception, however well-intentioned, would only become more difficult to maintain as they became true members of the community rather than peripheral figures. "Perhaps it would be better if I kept to the ranch more," Olivia suggested. "At least until winter passes and until spring comes." Quinn's profile was sharp against the night sky as he nodded slowly. "Your choice always has been." When they reached the ranch, Quinn helped her down from the wagon with the same careful courtesy he'd shown all evening. As her feet touched the ground, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and in the moonlight, his expression held a question he didn't voice. "Good night, Quinn," Olivia said softly, stepping back with Henry cradled against her. "Thank you again for the dance." He tipped his hat, his eyes never leaving hers. "Anytime, Olivia, anytime at all." As she walked toward the line shack, Olivia was acutely aware of his gaze following her, and of the growing complication neither of them had anticipated when he'd found her hiding in his barn, the undeniable pull between them that had nothing to do with convenience or safety or their carefully constructed story, and everything to do with the natural affinity of two souls recognizing something vital in each other. It was a complication she couldn't afford, Olivia reminded herself sternly as she prepared Henry for bed. Her priority was her son's safety, his future. Romance was a luxury beyond her reach, especially with a man as honorable as Quinn, a man who deserved the truth she couldn't give him. Yet as she lay in her narrow bed that night, the memory of his hand at her waist and the subtle scent of him lingered, making sleep elusive, and her resolve increasingly fragile. The weeks following the social brought changes to the ranch as summer began its gradual surrender to autumn. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler, and the leaves of the aspens that dotted the hills turned to brilliant gold. In the garden, Olivia harvested the last of the summer vegetables and planted hardier crops for fall, while Quinn busied himself with preparations for the cattle drive that would take him away from the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. The upcoming separation loomed large in Olivia's mind. Since her arrival at the ranch, Quinn had never been gone for more than a day or two at most. The prospect of managing alone for such an extended period filled her with a mixture of anxiety and determination to prove herself capable. "Jensen's boy will ride out every few days to check on you," Quinn explained as they sat at his cabin table the evening before his departure. Sheriff Porter said he'd make a point to swing by as well. "There's plenty of firewood stacked behind the line shack, and I've moved the milk goat closer to your place so you won't have to walk far." Olivia nodded, touched by his thoroughness. "We'll be fine, Quinn. I'm not completely helpless, you know. Never thought you were." He glanced at Henry, who was attempting to crawl on a blanket spread before the fire, his chubby legs not quite coordinated enough for forward motion. "It's just, never left anyone in charge of the place before." The implication that she was now, in some sense, responsible for his home, that he trusted her with something so precious to him, warmed Olivia deeply. "I'll take good care of everything," she promised, "and we'll be here when you return." Quinn's eyes met hers across the table, something unspoken passing between them. For a moment, Olivia thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he rose abruptly to pour more coffee. "Brought something for you," he said, retrieving a package wrapped in brown paper from a shelf. "Meant to give it to you earlier, but there never seemed to be the right time." Curious, Olivia unwrapped the package to reveal a volume of poetry by Alfred, Lord Tennyson, its leather binding worn but well cared for. "Quinn," she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "This is beautiful," he shrugged, clearly embarrassed by her reaction. "Noticed you looking at it in Jensen's store, thought you might like something to read while I'm gone. Nights get long out here when you're alone." The thoughtfulness of the gift nearly brought tears to her eyes. Books had been her refuge in Boston, her escape from the constraints of her life there. That Quinn had noticed her lingering over this volume and thought to purchase, it secretly revealed an attentiveness she hadn't realized he possessed. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing that anything more effusive would only increase his discomfort. "I'll treasure it." His expression softened, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just don't go filling your head with too many romantic notions. Tennyson's got some fanciful ideas about love, and you don't approve of fanciful ideas," Olivia teased, relieved to lighten the moment. Quinn's smile widened slightly. "Reckon there's a place for fancy even out here, just got to balance it with practicality." The conversation turned to more mundane matters, final instructions for the care of the chickens. What to do if a sudden storm blew in. The location of extra ammunition for the revolver he'd insisted she keep in the line shack. Yet underlying these practical concerns was a current of something deeper, a reluctance on both their parts to acknowledge the impending separation. When it was time for Olivia to return to the line shack with Henry, Quinn walked them to the door. In the lamplight, his expression was uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I'll be leaving before dawn," he said. "So I reckon this is goodbye for now." Olivia nodded, shifting Henry to her hip. "Be careful, Quinn, and come back safely, always do." He hesitated, then reached out to touch Henry's cheek gently. "You be good for your mama, little man. Don't go learning to walk proper before I get back." The tender gesture, so uncharacteristic of Quinn's usual reserve around the baby, caught Olivia off guard. In that moment, she saw not just the man who had offered them shelter and protection, but a man who had, against all odds, formed a genuine attachment to her son. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to Quinn's cheek, his skin warm beneath her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried into the night, her heart pounding with the boldness of her action and the realization of how deeply she had come to care for the taciturn cowboy who had changed her life with a simple promise of food before dawn. Quinn's absence transformed the rhythm of the ranch. Without his steady presence, the days stretched longer, the work somehow harder despite being essentially the same tasks Olivia had been performing since her arrival. She found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, the jingle of his spurs, the low rumble of his voice, all conspicuously absent from the quiet landscape. Henry, blissfully unaware of the change, continued his determined attempts at mobility, finally mastering the art of crawling in Quinn's absence, a milestone Olivia celebrated alone, wishing irrationally that Quinn had been there to witness it. True to his word, Jensen's teenage son rode out every few days to check on them, bringing mail and news from town. Sheriff Porter made one brief appearance, his weathered face betraying nothing as he questioned Olivia about her welfare and assured her that Quinn was a good man who knows cattle better than most. The sheriff's visit left Olivia unsettled, however. There had been something in his gaze, a shrewdness, an assessment that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by the story of her widowhood and cousinship with Quinn. She resolved to be more careful around him in the future, to reveal as little as possible of herself or her past. On the 10th day of Quinn's absence, Olivia was hanging laundry when she noticed a plume of dust on the horizon. Shading her eyes, she made out the unmistakable silhouette of a rider approaching at speed too fast for a casual visitor, too direct to be lost. Heart pounding, she hurried inside the lined shack, scooped up Henry from his blanket on the floor, and reached for the revolver Quinn had left her. With shaking hands, she checked that it was loaded, then positioned herself by the window where she could see the approaching rider without being easily spotted. As the horse drew nearer, however, Olivia's fear gave way to confusion. The rider wasn't a stranger, it was young Jensen, spurring his horse as if the devil himself were in pursuit. Setting the revolver aside but keeping Henry close, Olivia stepped onto the porch just as Jensen pulled his lathered horse to a stop in a cloud of dust. "Mrs. Redfield," he gasped, his young face flushed with exertion. "You need to come quick, it's Quinn, he's been hurt." Olivia's blood ran cold. "Hurt? How badly? What happened?" Stampede during the drive. "Got thrown from his horse and trampled some. Doc Simmons is with him at our place. Pa didn't think he should be moved again till you'd been told." The news hit her like a physical blow, but Olivia forced herself to remain calm. "I need to go to him. Can you help me hitch the wagon?" Jensen nodded, already dismounting. "Pa said to bring you and the baby back to town. You can stay with us till Quinn's well enough to return home." Working with practiced efficiency born of necessity, Olivia gathered essentials for herself and Henry while Jensen hitched Quinn's draft horse to the wagon. Within 20 minutes, they were on the road to Prosperity Creek, Henry secured in a makeshift nest of blankets, Olivia driving with a determination that belied her inner turmoil. "How bad is it, truly?" she asked Jensen, who rode alongside the wagon. "Please don't spare me the truth." The boy hesitated. "Doc says he's got some broken ribs for sure, legs broke too, took a hoof to the head, which is what's got Doc most worried. He was unconscious when they brought him in yesterday, unconscious for a day." The information sent fresh fear coursing through Olivia. She had heard stories of men who never woke after head injuries, who lingered for days or weeks before slipping away. The thought of Quinn, vital, strong Quinn reduced to such a state, was unbearable. "But he's alive," she pressed. "Yes, madam, and Quinn's tough as they come. Doc says if anyone can pull through this, it's him." Small comfort, but Olivia clung to it nonetheless as they made the journey to town, every jolt of the wagon a reminder of the urgency of their mission. Henry, sensing her distress, remained unusually quiet, his wide eyes taking in her tense expression with an awareness that seemed beyond his months. The Jensens' home sat at the edge of town, a comfortable two-story structure that reflected the prosperity of their mercantile business. Martha Jensen met them at the door, her typically cheerful face drawn with concern. "He's upstairs, first door on the right," she told Olivia, taking Henry from her arms. "I'll look after this little one. You go on up. He's been asking for you since he came to earlier." The news that Quinn was conscious sent relief washing through Olivia. She hurried up the stairs, pausing outside the indicated door to compose herself before entering. Nothing could have prepared her for the sight that greeted her. Quinn lay motionless on the bed, his normally robust frame looking somehow diminished against the white sheets. His face was a palette of bruises, one eye swollen shut, a bandage wrapped around his head. His right leg was splinted and elevated, and from the way the blanket lay across his chest, she could tell his ribs were similarly bound. Doc Simmons, a balding man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, rose from a chair beside the bed as she entered. "Mrs. Redfield," he greeted her quietly. "He's been in and out of consciousness. When he's lucid, he asks for you." Olivia moved to the bedside, her heart constricting at Quinn's battered appearance. Will he recover fully? The doctor's hesitation told her more than his words. The broken bones will heal in time. The head injury is more concerning. There's swelling, and we won't know the full extent of the damage until it subsides. But he will wake again, she pressed, needing some certainty to cling to. "I believe so, yes." "He's shown good signs, recognizing where he is, remembering what happened. That's promising." Doc Simmons patted her shoulder. "Talk to him. Even if he seems unresponsive, familiar voices can help." After the doctor left, Olivia pulled the chair close to Quinn's bedside and tentatively took his hand, the one not splinted, for what appeared to be broken fingers. His skin was warm, his pulse steady beneath her touch, small reassurances that life still flowed strongly within him despite his battered exterior. "Quinn," she said softly, her throat tight with emotion, "I'm here. Henry and I are safe, and we're waiting for you to get better." No response came, but she continued speaking, telling him about Henry's newfound mobility, the state of the garden, the book of poetry she'd been reading in his absence, anything to fill the silence and give him a connection to the world beyond his injured body. As darkness fell, Martha brought Henry up for a brief visit, then insisted on keeping him for the night so Olivia could remain at Quinn's side. "He needs you more than this little one does right now," she said firmly. "Henry will be fine with me, and you'll be no good to either of them if you don't focus on one at a time." Exhausted and grateful, Olivia accepted the arrangement. Throughout the long night, she dozed fitfully in the chair, waking at every change in Quinn's breathing, every small sound that might indicate his return to consciousness. It was just before dawn when his hand twitched in hers, then tightened weakly. Olivia jerked fully awake to find his uninjured eye open, regarding her with a mixture of confusion and relief. "Olivia," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You're here." She leaned closer, joy surging through her at this simple recognition. "Of course I'm here, where else would I be?" A faint smile touched his cracked lips. "Thought I might have dreamed you. The barn, the baby, all of it. No dream," she assured him, squeezing his hand gently. "We're real, and we're waiting for you to come home." "Home," he repeated, the word weighted with meaning beyond its simple syllable. His eye drifted closed again, but his grip on her hand remained, an anchor in the sea of pain he was clearly navigating. Doc Simmons, arriving for his morning examination, was cautiously optimistic about Quinn's responsiveness. "The fact that he recognized you and is coherent is an excellent sign," he told Olivia, "but recovery will be slow. The ribs alone will take weeks to heal, and the leg longer still." "How long before he can return to the ranch?" Olivia asked, practical concerns beginning to assert themselves alongside her emotional relief. "A month at minimum," the doctor said firmly. "He can't be jostled over those rough roads with his injuries, and he'll need regular care that will be difficult to provide out there." The prospect of a month in town, away from the ranch that had become home, filled Olivia with conflicting emotions. On one hand, Quinn would receive better care here. On the other, their carefully constructed story might not withstand such prolonged scrutiny. Martha Jensen, ever practical, offered a solution. "You'll both stay with us," she declared when Olivia voiced her concerns. "Quinn in this room, you and Henry in the guest room down the hall. My husband can ride out to check on the ranch every few days, make sure everything's in order." "I couldn't impose," Olivia began, but Martha waved away her objection. "Nonsense. What are neighbors for? Besides, Quinn's done plenty for this town over the years, whether he acknowledges it or not. Time we return the favor." And so it was decided. Jensen would arrange for a neighbor with ranching experience to look after Quinn's cattle and property, while Olivia would remain in town to help with Quinn's recovery. The arrangement, while practical, placed her in the exact situation she had hoped to avoid under the constant observation of townspeople whose curiosity would only grow with prolonged exposure. Yet as she looked at Quinn's battered face, peaceful now in drug-induced sleep, Olivia knew she had no choice. He had risked everything to help her and Henry when they were at their most vulnerable. She could do no less for him now. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Olivia spent her mornings caring for Henry and helping Martha with household tasks, her afternoons at Quinn's bedside, reading to him from the Tennyson volume he had given her, or simply sitting in companionable silence as he drifted in and out of sleep. Quinn's recovery progressed steadily if slowly. The swelling around his head injury subsided, revealing no permanent damage to his cognitive functions, though headaches plagued him regularly. His ribs and leg caused him constant discomfort, making him a less than ideal patient at times, particularly as his strength returned and his frustration at his own helplessness grew. "I should be at the ranch," he muttered one afternoon, 2 weeks into their stay at the Jensens. "Cattle need tending, winter's coming." "The cattle are fine," Olivia reassured him, adjusting his pillows with practiced ease. "Mr. Peterson is checking on them daily, and he says your foreman did an excellent job finishing the drive. The payment is in the bank, and there's plenty of hay for winter." Quinn grimaced, either from pain or annoyance at having his responsibilities handled by others. Olivia suspected both. "And the line shack. You'll need proper supplies before the snow comes." "Martha has already organized a group of men to deliver firewood next week," she told him, touched by his concern despite his own condition. "Really, Quinn, everything is being taken care of. Your only job right now is to heal." He caught her wrist as she smoothed the blanket over him, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. "And what about you and Henry? This wasn't what you signed up for, playing nurse to a broken cowboy." Olivia met his gaze steadily. "As I recall, I didn't sign up for anything. You offered shelter to a desperate woman and her baby with no conditions attached. If the situation is now reversed, why should my response be any different?" A long moment passed between them, his blue eyes searching hers for what? Doubt, resentment. Finding neither, his expression softened. "You're a remarkable woman, Olivia Redfield," he said finally, releasing her wrist. "Henry's lucky to have you for his mother." The compliment warmed her, but it also served as a reminder of the deception that still lay between them. Quinn knew her as a widow, a cousin in need, not as the woman who had fled a loveless marriage to a powerful man, taking his son to prevent the child from being raised in an environment of cruelty and manipulation. The truth pressed against her lips, demanding release, but she swallowed it back. Now was not the time to burden Quinn with her real story, not when he was fighting to recover from injuries that might still prove life-altering. Instead, she placed her hand over his. "And we're both lucky to have found you, Quinn Jacobson. Now rest, doctor's orders." As October gave way to November, bringing the first snow to the mountains surrounding Prosperity Creek, Quinn's recovery accelerated. He progressed from being confined to bed to sitting in a chair by the window, then to navigating the upstairs hall with crutches, his determination to regain his independence evident in the set of his jaw and the intensity of his efforts. Doc Simmons pronounced himself satisfied with the healing of Quinn's ribs and head injury, though he remained cautious about the leg. "The bones are knitting well," he explained during one examination, "but you'll need to keep weight off it for at least another month. And there may be some permanent limitation to its strength, only time will tell." The possibility of a lasting disability cast a shadow over Quinn that Olivia could see plainly, though he never spoke of it directly. Instead, he redoubled his efforts at rehabilitation, pushing himself harder than the doctor recommended and bearing the resulting pain with stoic silence. Meanwhile, Olivia found herself increasingly integrated into the life of Prosperity Creek. Martha Jensen had introduced her to the women's sewing circle, where she contributed her considerable skill to making quilts for the coming winter. Henry, now crawling with purpose and pulling himself up on furniture, had become a favorite among the townspeople, who delighted in his sunny disposition and growing personality. The story of her widowhood and relationship to Quinn seemed accepted without question, though she occasionally caught Sheriff Porter watching her with that same assessing gaze that had unsettled her during his visit to the ranch. She was careful to reveal little of her past, focusing instead on her present life at Quinn's ranch and her hopes for Henry's future. It was during the third week of November, as they prepared for the town's Thanksgiving celebration, that the fragile peace of their arrangement was shattered. Olivia was helping Martha prepare pies in the Jensen kitchen when the sheriff appeared at the back door, his expression grave. "Mrs. Redfield," he said, removing his hat, "might I have a word in private?" Martha glanced between them, concern evident in her face, but tactfully excused herself to check on Henry's nap upstairs. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Olivia asked, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. Porter closed the door behind him, ensuring their privacy. "Received a telegram yesterday that I think might interest you." He withdrew a folded paper from his pocket. "From Boston. Seems there's a man there looking for his wife and infant son who disappeared some months back, offering a substantial reward for information." Olivia's fingers tightened on the edge of the table, the only outward sign of her distress. "I'm not sure what that has to do with me, Sheriff." "Ordinarily, nothing," he agreed, his gaze never leaving her face. "Except the description matches you pretty close: auburn hair, green eyes, about 5'4". Son would be the right age too, and the name, well, that's where it gets interesting." He consulted the telegram. "Olivia Blackwood, née Richmond." The sound of her married name sent a chill through Olivia's body. She had been so careful, had traveled so far, had changed her appearance as much as possible. And still, William had found her, or at least had come close enough to cause her world to tremble on its foundations. "I'm Olivia Redfield," she said firmly. "A widow from back east, Quinn's cousin." Porter nodded slowly. "That's what you've said, yes, and Quinn's backed your story from the start. But see, I've known Quinn Jacobson for 5 years, and in all that time he's never once mentioned family back east. Not a mother, father, brother, or cousin." He leaned forward slightly. "Makes a man wonder what else might not be entirely truthful." Olivia lifted her chin, summoning the composure that had been drilled into her through years of Boston society. "Are you accusing me of something, Sheriff?" "Not accusing, just asking." His voice remained level, almost kind. "If there's trouble following you, Mrs. Redfield, or whatever your name might be, it's better I know about it before it reaches our town." The moment stretched between them, filled with the weight of decisions that would impact not just her future, but Henry's and now Quinn's as well. If William Blackwood traced her to Prosperity Creek, he would bring with him all the power and influence that had made him both respected and feared in Boston society. Quinn, still recovering from serious injuries, would be no match for the legal and financial resources William could deploy to reclaim what he considered his property, his wife and son. "I should speak with Quinn," she said finally, choosing her words with care, "before I say anything further." Porter studied her face, then nodded. "Fair enough, but don't wait too long. If this Boston fellow is as determined as his telegram suggests, he'll have men searching every town from here to the Mississippi." After the sheriff departed, Olivia stood motionless in the kitchen, her mind racing. She had known this day might come, had prepared for it in theory, but the reality of William's pursuit was far more terrifying than she had allowed herself to imagine. Taking a moment to compose herself, she climbed the stairs to Quinn's room. He was seated by the window, a book open in his lap, his splinted leg propped on a stool before him. The afternoon light caught the gold in his hair, and for a moment, Olivia simply stood in the doorway, memorizing the sight of him, a good man who had offered her kindness when she needed it most, who had never asked for more than she could give. He looked up, his smile fading as he registered her expression. "What's happened?" Closing the door behind her, Olivia crossed to sit on the edge of the bed facing him. "Sheriff Porter was just here. He received a telegram from my husband." Quinn's face remained impressively impassive, though she saw his knuckles whiten where he gripped the book. "I wasn't aware you had one of those still living." "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words wholly inadequate. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I was so afraid and you were so kind, and the lie seemed safer for everyone." "Tell me now," he said simply, "all of it." And so she did. She told him about William Blackwood, 30 years her senior, a pillar of Boston society whose public philanthropy masked a private cruelty. How her father, facing financial ruin, had essentially sold her to William at 18 to satisfy his debts. How William had appeared charming during their courtship, only to reveal his true nature after the wedding, controlling, manipulative, occasionally violent when crossed. "When I learned I was with child, I was terrified," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not of motherhood, but of what kind of father William would be. I'd seen how he treated his servants, his horses, anyone he considered beneath him, the thought of my child being raised to become like him." "So you ran," Quinn supplied when her voice faltered. Olivia nodded. "I planned for months in secret. Set aside what money I could from my household allowance, learned which trains would take me west, waited until Henry was strong enough to travel. We left the night of a charity gala William was hosting, slipped out while the house was full of guests and staff too busy to notice my absence until it was too late." Quinn absorbed this information in silence, his expression unreadable. "And now he's found you?" "Not yet," she corrected. "But he's looking, offering rewards. It's only a matter of time before someone connects Olivia Blackwood to Olivia Redfield." "You could keep running," Quinn suggested, though his tone suggested he knew she had considered and rejected this option. "Head further west, change your name again." Olivia shook her head. "He has resources I can't match, private detectives, connections with law enforcement across the country, and legally." She swallowed hard. "Legally, he has every right to reclaim both me and Henry. A wife and child are a husband's property in the eyes of the law." Quinn's jaw tightened at this statement, a flash of anger crossing his features. "Not out here, they aren't. Not if I have anything to say about it." The fierce protectiveness in his voice brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "I've put you in an impossible position, Quinn. I never meant to bring this trouble to your door. The trouble isn't of your making," he said firmly, "and you're not facing it alone." He leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement but capturing her gaze with an intensity that held her motionless. "I meant what I said that first night, Olivia. You and Henry will be safe here for as long as you choose to stay." "But William, let him come," Quinn interrupted, a dangerous edge to his voice. "Let him try to take what isn't his to claim anymore." Olivia stared at him, struck by the transformation from the gentle, reserved man she had come to know to this fierce protector ready to challenge a powerful adversary on her behalf. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly. "Risk everything for us." Quinn's expression softened, vulnerability replacing determination in his eyes. "Because in these past months you and Henry have become—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You've become the family I never thought I'd have, the home I was missing even when I was on my own land." The admission hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither had voiced until now. Olivia's heart thundered in her chest as Quinn reached for her hand, enfolding it in his larger one. "I'm not good with fancy words," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Never have been. But I know what matters to me, and Olivia, you and Henry, you matter more than anything. I don't care what name you were born with or what man claims he has rights to you. All I care about is that you're safe and happy and, if possible," he swallowed visibly, "that you might consider staying. Not just through winter, but for good." Tears spilled onto Olivia's cheeks as the full impact of his words registered. "Quinn," she whispered, her voice breaking on his name, Are you asking what I think you're asking? He nodded, a rare smile softening his features. Reckon I am, though I'm making a mess of it. Olivia Redfield or Blackwood, or whatever name you choose, would you consider being Olivia Jacobson instead? Not just for show, but for real, joy, pure and unexpected, bloomed in Olivia's heart, even as practical concerns crowded her mind. But William, the legal complications, we'll face them together, Quinn assured her, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. There are ways out here in the territories, divorces granted for abandonment or cruelty, and if legal means fail. His expression hardened momentarily. I'll protect what's mine by any means necessary. The declaration should have frightened her, but instead, Olivia found herself drawing strength from his determination. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she allowed herself to envision a future not defined by running and hiding, a future where she and Henry belonged somewhere, with someone who valued them not as possessions, but as the family they were meant to be. Yes, she said simply, the single word carrying the weight of all her hopes and fears. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife in name and in truth. Quinn's face transformed with a joy so pure it nearly took her breath away. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her from the bed to the edge of his chair, where she perched carefully to avoid jarring his injured leg. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. Been wanting to do this since the night of the social, he murmured, leaning forward to close the distance between them. His lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as months of unspoken longing found expression. Olivia's hands came up to frame his face, mindful of his healing injuries but unable to resist the pull between them. In that moment, all the complications of their situation receded. There was only this man, this feeling, this certainty that she had found her true home at last. When they finally parted, both breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. We'll need to act quickly, he said, practicality reasserting itself. Get married before your husband's agents can find you. Establish our claim to Henry as a family. Olivia nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the steps they would need to take. The preacher, would he marry us without asking too many questions? Reverend Davis is a good man who believes in second chances, Quinn affirmed. If we explain the situation, I believe he'll help us. A soft knock at the door interrupted their planning. Martha Jensen peered in, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Is everything all right? Sheriff Porter seemed quite serious when he left. Quinn and Olivia exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. It was Quinn who answered, his hand finding Olivia's and holding it firmly. Everything's just fine, Martha, he said, a newfound confidence in his voice. In fact, I was just asking Olivia to marry me, and to my great fortune, she's agreed. Martha's eyes widened, then crinkled with delight as she took in their clasped hands and Olivia's tear-streaked but radiant face. Well, it's about time, she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. I've been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Oh, this calls for a celebration. As Martha bustled off to spread the news and begin planning what would undoubtedly become a town event rather than a private ceremony, Quinn squeezed Olivia's hand. No turning back now, he said softly. Are you certain this is what you want? Olivia looked into the face of the man who had first offered her food and shelter on a stormy night, who had given her and Henry a home without demands or conditions, who now offered to stand between them and any threat the world might present. The answer came without hesitation or doubt. More certain than I've ever been of anything in my life. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Reverend Davis, upon hearing a carefully edited version of Olivia's situation, agreed to perform the ceremony with minimal documentation. Martha Jensen and the Women's Sewing Circle rallied to create a wedding dress for Olivia and new clothes for both Quinn and Henry, while Jensen himself organized a town gathering to celebrate the union. Through it all, Olivia existed in a state of nervous anticipation. Torn between joy at the future she and Quinn were building and fear that William's agents might appear to shatter their fragile happiness. Sheriff Porter, who had accepted their engagement with a knowing look but no further questions, kept a watchful eye on strangers passing through town, a gesture of support that touched Olivia deeply. Quinn's recovery continued steadily, his determination to stand without crutches for the wedding driving him to push through pain during his rehabilitation exercises. By the day before the ceremony, he could walk short distances with only a cane, though Doc Simmons cautioned that his leg might never regain its full strength. "A small price to pay," Quinn remarked to Olivia as they sat together on the Jensens' porch the evening before their wedding, enjoying a rare moment alone. Henry slept peacefully indoors, exhausted from a day of increased mobility as he mastered the art of cruising along furniture. "If I hadn't been injured, we might have continued as we were never speaking the truth of what we felt." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I think we would have found our way eventually," she said softly. "Some things are simply meant to be." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "Never took you for a believer in fate, Mrs. Almost Jacobson." She smiled at the term, warmth spreading through her at the thought of truly becoming his wife. "Perhaps not fate exactly. But I believe people find each other when they're meant to, when they're ready to recognize what they need." "And what do you need, Olivia?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low rumble that sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Safety," she answered honestly. "A home. Someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I can provide or represent." She tilted her face up to his. "All the things I've found with you." His kiss was gentle, but filled with promise of the life they would build together, of the love that had grown between them despite all odds, of the family they were creating from the broken pieces of their individual pasts. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sun casting long shadows across freshly fallen snow. The entire town of Prosperity Creek had turned out for the occasion, filling the small church to capacity and spilling onto the street outside. Quinn, dressed in a new suit that made him look both distinguished and faintly uncomfortable, waited at the altar with Sheriff Porter standing as his best man, a development that had surprised Olivia, but which Quinn had explained simply. "Man's got a good heart under that badge. And he knows how to keep secrets." Martha Jensen had transformed the church with pine boughs, red ribbons, and candles that filled the space with a warm, festive glow. Henry, dressed in a miniature suit that matched Quinn's, sat contentedly on Martha's lap in the front pew, occasionally babbling in his mysterious language and drawing fond chuckles from those nearby. When the church door opened and Olivia stepped through on Mr. Jensen's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation. Her dress, though simple by Eastern standards, was elegantly fashioned from cream-colored satin with lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was arranged in loose curls beneath a crown of winter berries and evergreen, and in her hands she carried a bouquet of pine, holly, and dried flowers from the summer garden. But it was her face that caught and held Quinn's gaze, radiant with joy, her green eyes shining with unshed tears as she moved toward him down the aisle. In that moment, all his doubts, all his fears about his ability to protect her from the threats that might still come, dissolved in the certainty that this woman was meant to be his wife, this child his son, this life his future. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Davis speaking eloquently about new beginnings and the courage required to forge a path different from the one society might expect. When the time came for vows, Quinn had surprised Olivia by writing his own simple, heartfelt words that moved her to tears. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "I promise to be your shelter in every storm, your companion in every joy, and your protector against any who would harm you or our son. I promise to love you both not as possessions, but as the precious gifts you are freely given, freely received. I promise to build with you a home where truth and love are the foundations, where fear has no place. This I vow from this day forward for all the days of my life." Olivia, too overcome to improvise, had simply repeated the traditional vows, though the meaning she infused into each word transformed them from ritual into heartfelt promise. When Reverend Davis pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn's kiss was gentle but thorough, drawing cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the assembled townspeople. The celebration that followed at the church hall was joyous and boisterous, with music, dancing, though Quinn participated only minimally due to his leg, and enough food to feed the town twice over. Henry passed from arm to arm, thoroughly enjoying being the center of attention, his infectious laughter adding to the festive atmosphere. It was late afternoon when Sheriff Porter approached Quinn and Olivia, who were seated at the head table watching the revelry with contented smiles. "Hate to interrupt," he said quietly, "but there's something you should know." He glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Received word that a private detective was asking questions in Cheyenne last week. Description matches the man your former husband might have hired." Olivia felt a chill despite the warmth of the hall. "How far is Cheyenne from here?" "About 3 days' ride in good weather," Porter replied. "Longer in snow, but that's not the point. Man was headed south after Cheyenne, following a false lead I arranged to be planted there." Quinn's eyebrows rose. "You did what now?" The sheriff's weathered face creased in a small smile. "Let's just say I've got connections of my own, and not all lawmen believe a woman and child are property to be claimed against their will." He nodded to Olivia. "Your marriage today is legal and binding in Wyoming Territory. Any claims your former husband might make would be complicated by that fact, especially given your—" He paused delicately. "Your reasons for leaving." Relief washed through Olivia, followed quickly by gratitude so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Sheriff Porter, I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," he said gruffly. "Just be happy, both of you deserve it." With a tip of his hat, he melted back into the crowd, leaving them to absorb the implications of his news. Quinn reached for Olivia's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We're safe," he said softly. "Truly safe." As the celebration continued around them, Olivia allowed herself to believe it to embrace not just the love she felt for Quinn and the family they were creating, but the future that stretched before them, bright with possibility and free from the shadows of the past. Later that evening, as Quinn helped her into the wagon that would take them back to the ranch now officially theirs, as husband and wife, Olivia looked up at the stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had led her here. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked as he settled beside her, tucking blankets around them against the December chill. Henry slept peacefully in a basket at their feet, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Olivia leaned into his warmth, marveling at how natural it felt to be with him this way, no longer pretending, no longer hiding, but truly together as they were meant to be. "I was thinking about that night in the barn," she said softly. "How terrified I was, how certain that every shadow held danger. And then you said those words, 'You'll both be fed before dawn,' and something in me knew I could trust you, even when I trusted no one else." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made, letting you stay. Best decision I ever made, saying yes." She turned her face up to his, illuminated by the moonlight reflecting off the snow. "Take us home, Quinn." And so he did, guiding the horses through the winter night toward the ranch that had become a sanctuary. Toward the future they would build together, a future founded not on fear or obligation, but on love freely given and joyfully returned. As the lights of Prosperity Creek faded behind them and the silhouette of their ranch appeared on the horizon, Olivia Jacobson felt the final pieces of her heart slide into place. She had run thousands of miles seeking safety, but in the end, she had found something far more precious. She had found home. The following spring brought renewal to more than just the land. As the snow melted and the first green shoots pushed through the soil in Olivia's expanded garden, life at the Jacobson Ranch settled into a rhythm of domestic harmony that sometimes still surprised her with its simplicity and joy. Quinn's leg had healed better than Doc Simmons had predicted, though he still walked with a slight limp that became more pronounced in cold or damp weather. He had adapted his ranching methods accordingly, teaching Olivia to ride and including her in more aspects of the cattle operation than would have been typical for a rancher's wife. Together, they had expanded the herd, built a proper chicken coop, and added a room to the main cabin where Henry now slept in a bed Quinn had crafted with his own hands. Henry, now an active toddler of 15 months, filled their days with laughter and constant motion. He had spoken his first word, "Pa," on a snowy January evening, causing Quinn to sweep him up in a bear hug that had both father and son giggling uncontrollably. Mama had followed shortly thereafter, along with a growing vocabulary that included the names of animals, foods, and his favorite objects. The threat of William Blackwood had receded over the winter months. Sheriff Porter's occasional telegrams assured them that the private detectives had followed false leads further south, eventually giving up the search as spring planting season approached, and William's attention presumably turned to more immediate concerns in Boston. Still, Olivia maintained a cautious vigilance, scanning the faces of strangers who occasionally passed through their property with a wariness born of hard experience. Quinn, understanding her fears without needing them voiced, made a point of teaching her to shoot with increasing accuracy, and ensured she was never truly alone when he needed to be away from the ranch. On this particular April morning, Olivia stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching as Quinn showed Henry how to feed the chickens, the little boy's delighted squeals carrying clearly across the yard as the hens pecked grain from his chubby hand. The sight of them together, Quinn's tall frame bent protectively over Henry's tiny one. Their heads close as Quinn murmured instructions filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. She placed a hand absently on her stomach, where the newest member of their family was just beginning to make its presence known, a secret she had confirmed with Doc Simmons the previous week, but had yet to share with Quinn. Tonight, she had decided. Tonight, when the day's work was done and Henry was asleep, she would tell her husband that their family would be growing by one come autumn. As if sensing her thoughts, Quinn looked up, his smile spreading across his face as he caught sight of her in the doorway. He said something to Henry, then straightened and made his way toward her, his limp barely noticeable in the soft earth of the yard. "You're looking mighty pleased with yourself this morning, Mrs. Jacobson," he observed as he reached her, leaning in to steal a quick kiss. "Something I should know about," Olivia laughed, shaking her head at his perceptiveness. "Perhaps there is, Mr. Jacobson, but it can wait until later." Quinn raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, but didn't press further. Instead, he gestured toward the distant hills, where the first wildflowers of spring were beginning to dot the landscape with color. "Was thinking we might take a picnic up to the high meadow today," he suggested. "Weather's fine and Henry would enjoy the adventure." The spontaneity of the suggestion delighted Olivia. In Boston, every outing had been planned days in advance, every meal a formal affair governed by strict social protocols. Here, with Quinn, life flowed with a natural ease that still felt like freedom after the constraints of her former life. "That sounds wonderful," she agreed. "I'll pack a basket while you finish with the chickens." An hour later, they were making their way up the gentle slope toward the meadow, Henry secure on Quinn's shoulders, Olivia carrying the picnic basket. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and new growth, birdsong filling the air around them. The meadow, when they reached it, was a carpet of early wildflowers, blue lupines, yellow buttercups, and delicate white columbines nodding in the breeze. Henry, set down to explore, immediately toddled toward the nearest patch of color, his small face alight with discovery. Quinn spread a blanket beneath the sheltering branches of a large ponderosa pine, then helped Olivia arrange their simple meal: cold chicken, bread and cheese, early lettuce from the garden, and apple preserves from the previous autumn's harvest. As they ate, watching Henry's careful investigation of a particularly fascinating beetle, Quinn slipped his arm around Olivia's waist, drawing her close against his side. "Happy," he asked quietly, his breath warm against her hair. Olivia leaned into him, savoring the solid strength of him. Completely, she answered truthfully. Are you, more than I ever thought possible? He pressed a kiss to her temple. Been thinking lately about that night in the barn, how close I came to not finding you there. What do you mean? Quinn's expression grew thoughtful. Almost didn't check the barn that night. Storm was coming in fast, and I was tired from mending fences all day, thought about leaving it till morning. He shook his head slightly. Something told me to go, though. Call it instinct or divine intervention or plain dumb luck, but I'm grateful for it every day. Olivia shivered at the thought of how differently things might have unfolded of herself, and Henry huddled in that barn through a Wyoming thunderstorm, moving on the next day without ever meeting the man who would become the center of their world. I believe we were meant to find each other, she said softly, that some things are written in our hearts long before we understand them. Quinn's smile held a tender amusement. My practical wife talking about fate and destiny, what's next? Reading tea leaves to predict the future. She laughed, poking him gently in the ribs. I don't need tea leaves for that, Quinn Jacobson. I can see our future quite clearly already. And what do you see? He asked, his tone light but his eyes serious as they met hers. Olivia took a deep breath, deciding that this moment, perfect in its simplicity, surrounded by beauty and filled with love, was the right time after all. I see us together, watching our children grow, Henry and... She placed her hand deliberately over her still flat stomach. And this little one coming in October. Quinn went utterly still beside her, his eyes widening as her words registered. Olivia, he breathed, his voice barely audible. Are you saying... She nodded, suddenly nervous despite the joy bubbling up within her. Doc Simmons confirmed it last week. We're going to have a baby, Quinn. For a moment, he simply stared at her, emotion working across his features in waves, surprise, wonder, joy so pure it almost hurt to witness. Then, with careful reverence, he placed his hand over hers where it rested on her stomach. A baby, he repeated, the words filled with awe. Our baby. Yes, Olivia confirmed, tears of happiness beginning to spill down her cheeks. Ours in every way. Quinn gathered her into his arms then, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. For this gift, for Henry, for choosing to stay, for loving me, thank you for everything. As Henry toddled back to them, proudly displaying a wildflower clutched in his small fist, Olivia looked at the family they had created, the man who had offered shelter to a desperate woman and her baby, the child who had brought them together, and the new life growing within her, a testament to the love that had blossomed from that simple act of kindness. You'll both be fed before dawn, Quinn had promised on that stormy night so many months ago, but he had given them so much more than mere sustenance. He had given them a home, protection, purpose, and most importantly, a love that had transformed all their lives. As Quinn lifted Henry onto his lap, showing him how to weave the wildflower into a crown for his mother, Olivia silently renewed the vows she had made on their wedding day. To love this man, to cherish the family they had built, to face whatever challenges might come with the same courage that had brought her to his barn on that fateful night. The journey had been long and often frightening, but here in this meadow, surrounded by the beauty of the Wyoming spring and the love of her husband and son, Olivia Redfield Jacobson knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. And as Quinn's eyes met hers over Henry's head, filled with a promise that needed no words to express, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, but standing strong in the love that had begun with a simple promise of food before dawn and had grown into the greatest treasure of their lives.